Thank you, NCECA, and thank you to the Marks Project for proposing this panel, What's in a Mark? About the backstamps potters use to identify their pots. Thanks also to my fellow panelists, Margaret Carney, Beth Gerstein, and our moderator, Judith Schwartz. So, what's in a mark? Here's my story. It all begins in childhood. One of the delights my brothers and I had as children was turning over a pot to see if it said Spode on the bottom. If so, we cheered. If, on the other hand, it said Wedgwood, we booed. Other fine china companies were similarly maligned. Spode's backstamp was a tribal insignia for us, identifying our place in the ceramic firmament. You see, my grandfather was the managing director of Spode. Here he is with Granny and King George VI and the Queen Mum on a state visit to Spode after World War II. And here's my father in the corner, leaning against the front gates at the Spode factory in downtown Stoke-on-Trent. Dad was the sales director of Spode, and he's here with some American business people and the Copeland brothers. As children, we were also learning to distinguish bone china from earthenware. These were the pots that we had in our home. The weight and feel of particular plates and bowls, transfer printing from hand painting. We distinguished the lavishly gilded from plain hotelware. This sorting and classifying process imposed an understanding, however biased, on our ceramic sensibilities, a connoisseurship based on a backstamp. My tastes have changed, but I still think Spode is the best. It's all about pride. Here's a pot that makes me proud. It's the bowl my father was given by the board of directors at Spode when he turned 21 on October the 11th, 1940, when he attained his majority. On the left in this picture is my father and his brother Peter. And on the right is Uncle Peter in his RAF work clothes. He'd been reluctant to join up and was shot down and killed over Belgium in his first flight as a gunner in a Lancaster bomber, just before he turned 21. He too would have been given an equivalent bowl. So there are stories a backstamp doesn't tell. Like this backstamp or symbol from an Allach porcelain bowl made around the same time in the 1940s at the Dachau concentration camp. It's another tribal insignia with a dark story, illuminated in Edmund de Wail's underappreciated book, The White Road. It tells another story of white supremacy. Clearly, tribalism is not the answer. You see, what a backstamp is a clue. A backstamp is a lure tempting us to ask more questions and gather more evidence. A backstamp is an incomplete summary of the tasks performed by all the people who had a hand in making a pot. One way of looking at a backstamp is that they're a shorthand for entrepreneurialism and risk. This is Wedgwood's early factory in Etruria on the banks of the Trent and Mersey Canal. A backstamp is a story of investment, technical prowess, and employment, and the prolonged accomplishments of teamwork. This is a picture of the Spode factory back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. On the other hand, a backstamp doesn't tell us who dug the clay all heavy and cold and slurried the slip and carried the mold, who fettled the cup with a jagged line and stuck up the handles one at a time, who carried the sagger and fired the kiln and watched the smokestacks all forlorn. The marks on the bottom of a spode plate don't tell the story of 18th and 19th century industrial malpractice like child labor, lead poisoning, or the financial misery of laborers paid at pubs, drinking their earnings away as their wives and children wept outside. A stamp, by contrast, tells the story of the factory owner, the boss. This is Josiah Wedgwood's home, Barlaston Hall, just outside Stoke-on-Trent. Here's Spode's house, the Mount, in Penkle. The backstamp tells the story of prestige and class, capitalism, industrialism, and rapid urbanization, and during the 19th century, imperial expansion and the relentless pursuit of profit. In this context, a backstamp is a diversion. It's the symbol of a brand like Nike, Apple, or Facebook. Symbols are rarely innocent. They are a disguise, a deception. They are about power, particularly these days, the power of surveillance capitalism, where people are reduced to being chattels of commerce. The backstamp is one component of an advertising strategy. It is a device used to trick you into buying something. But what about a pot itself? Are we able to take the measure of a pot without the distraction of a backstamp? What is more important, the backstamp or the pot? I know the people who made these, but their names are secondary to their wonderful pots. I don't know the names of the potters who made these pots, that their pots are in fact wonderful. These pots were made by people who were known in their communities, but were unrecognized today. I expect these people were acknowledged as excellent makers, and they certainly are to me. Reading Leach and Cardew and Yanagi and apprenticing with Cardew changed the way I look at pots. Instead of turning a pot over to see who made it, we turned a pot over to look at the clay and how it was made. This visual and tactile inspection revealed how the way the clay was prepared and how the pot felt. Was it light or heavy? Balanced or imbalanced? Was the clay fine or coarse? Was it made crudely or carefully? Did the fired clay look like concrete or sandpaper? Or was the clay dead or alive? Was the pot dead or alive? This examination was revealing to the potter's intention, skill, and awareness as the backstamp. We were examining ceramic qualities beyond the name of the maker. But what if you turn over a pot and it has no mark? Is it worthless? Is it possible to look at a pot and see aesthetic qualities without the distraction of personality? Certainly, Korean rice bowls appropriated for the Japanese tea ceremony have been valued highly despite their anonymity, or even because of their anonymity. I hold out the possibility for a sublime pot made by an unknown craftsperson to be viewed and held by an unknown customer, and for the pot to provoke poetic reverie and a recognition of shared humanity across time and space. Is the unsigned earthenware pot on the left, made by a potter in the central Nigerian village of Kwali, whose name we do not know, less beautiful or important than the stoneware pot made and signed by Ladi Kwali at the nearby British Colonial Pottery Training Centre, supervised by Michael Cardew in Abuja? The unsigned pot is as flawlessly made, but is worth considerably less than the pot that has Ladi Kwali's stamp on it. Individuality confers value and status. A generic pot from a remote pottery village, wherever that village may be, is deemed less important than one made and stamped by a star, regardless of all else. Some modern and contemporary potters deliberately don't sign their work. What are their reasons for snubbing customary identification? English potter Richard Batterham doesn't sign his pots because he says it takes too long. Of course, there's the great Shoji Hamada, who didn't sign his pots, but signed the boxes that the pots were sold in, which seems more like a cunning marketing ploy than an exercise in genuine humility. My friend and mentor Sven Bayer also didn't sign his pots. He says of his decision, "When I was at Wenford, an old man visited Michael. And Michael told me he was a leading scholar of Sung dynasty pots. While he was at Wenford, he picked up a bowl of mine and said it had the character of a Sung dynasty pot. That was enough. I never signed a pot again. I dream of people picking up my pots and wondering where in the Sung world they came from." There is a shyness and obstinacy in his decision not to sign his pots. His uncompromised willingness to suffer the consequences of his idealism is in marked contrast to the rest of our individual and collective vanity. And if any arrogance is involved, it is borne out by the brilliance of Sven's work. This is a favorite bowl of mine made by Sven. The pots I use regularly and have around me have an agency beyond their backstamp or lack thereof. The identity of the maker recedes into irrelevance. I pick up a pot. When I pick up a pot, not a person or a company. I'm less interested in what name is on a pot than I am in what lies beneath the stamp. I'm not interested in what's inside the pot, I'm interested in what's inside the pot, not the contents, but the intention, the architecture, and the social history hidden in the pot. I'm interested in its entirety. Why was it made? How was it made? Under what conditions was it made? This pot made by David Drake, the enslaved African potter from 19th century Edgefield, South Carolina, he not only signed his name and date on pots like this, but also wrote rhyming couplets on them. This one reads, 19 days before Christmas Eve, after it's over, how many of us will grieve? Which tells the story of slave owners who operated forced labor camps, not plantations, giving human beings away as Christmas presents, tearing families apart for personal gain. The marks on Dave's pots not only tell a story, they manifest his humanity, while his pots proclaim his skill as a potter. Volkas's work is also unmistakably identifiable, like Dave's. Does a Volkas pot need a signature? We know They are his without the need of a backstamp. Same with Viola Frey. Here are other examples from across the ceramic spectrum of work that transcends the need for clinical identification, where style alone becomes a signature. Lucy Ree and Michael Eden, Leopold Foulem and Linda Sikora, Clive Bowen and Vernon Owens. Before I show my pots and backstamp, I want to give a shout out to my North Carolina-based former apprentices and quickly show you their work and backstamps. This is Matt Jones and his backstamp and his pots. Wonderful. Daniel Johnston and his backstamp and the wonderful installation he recently had at the North Carolina Museum of Art. And another installation of his at the Green Hill Center and another one in Santa Fe. Next up is Alex Matisse, holding a lovely stack of his East Fork bowls. Now comes Laura O'Keefe in nearby Pittsburgh, just down the road, and pots of hers. And here's Joseph Sand at his kiln just north of Ashboro and his backstamp. Here are some of mine. Oh, these are actually pots of mine that I made early on. Here we are at my first ever craft show with brown pots unsigned. They were so ugly I didn't want to make it to have them identified as mine. Decorative marks are as revealing of a potter's art as a backstamp. To my mind, a backstamp identifying a pot is subordinate to the marks on a pot. A mark on a pot contains a moment, an attitude, an intention, and a sensibility. As an artist with an ego, you want your pots to be instantly recognized by their shapes and glazes and decorative markings, without the need to turn them over for confirmation. Here are the backstamps used by my most recent apprentices, Stillman Browning Howe, Will Baskin, and our intern, Grace McCarthy. Every pot made at my pottery is recorded with a generic pottery stamp, WMH, which are my initials, followed by the initials of the apprentice who made the pot and the firing number. Here's my stamp from the recent 100th firing of my old salt kiln, and for pots in last production cycle, firing number 103. To conclude, we stamp our pots to acknowledge a sense of completion, to identify ourselves as makers, to recognize our excellence, to mark time, and to help create value. But they are a meager summary of our individual truths. Thank you.